Oh, good. Hello, everybody online, and I'm going to make you disappear. There you are. Okay, good morning. Last talk of the Saturday series for this year. We'll start again in January with a fanfare because it's the pre-Raphaelites, and that's a very different, completely different style as what we see today. Today we talk about the Barbizon group and the outdoor. Most of the time you will find that they call the Barbizon school, which is a misnomer because there was no theoretical ideas and theme for them. All they were doing is painting outdoor and almost uniquely landscape. So that's why I'm putting Barbizon group instead. Again, I'm going to bring in some history. You've already seen this one, but it's central to what's happening. The fact that we have, of course, in 1779, the French Revolution. In 1804, Napoleon, who was first consul, made himself emperor. And in 1814, he already had to step down, was sent to exile to the island of Elba, but then came back, and then there was the 100 days of Napoleon back in France, where he was rather welcome, by the way. And then by 1815 in Waterloo, he's defeated, and he has to step down for good. And then they send him on exile to St. Helena Island, which was much further, and from which he didn't come back. He died in 21. So when he left, the monarchy was restored with Louis XVIII, a younger brother to Louis XVI. In 1824, Louis XVIII dies, and his brother Charles X succeeds him. But he will be booted out in 30 with the July Revolution. The same year, we have the conquest of Algeria by the French. And after the abdication of Charles X on the 9th of August, it's a cousin, Louis Philippe, who is sworn as King of France, not King of France. Big difference. It now becomes a parliamentarian regime. Himself is not going to last that long. By 1848, because of all kind of excesses from the king and not keeping his promises that he was going to be the king for all the people, he's himself booted out in 1848 and abdicates. And this time for good, the French monarchy is abolished, and it's the establishment of the Second Republic. By the way, the First Republic was that short period of time when Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba. When he came, before he came back. And so that was the First Republic. So this is the Second Republic. In 1850, the nephew of Napoleon comes back from England, where he was in exile, and had been active politically all the time. He comes back and becomes the head of the government in France until 1852, where he decides himself to be named emperor, and it's going to last until the 70s, when he's defeated in the Franco-Prussian War. He's made prisoner near Kassel, Germany, and he will die not too long later. And now we have the Third Republic, which is going to go on all the way to the First World War. And we are now in France in the Fifth Republic. So that's a quick lesson of history.
Hopefully the last one.
Yes. When we talk about genres, it's really important. The Academy had pretty much defined some hierarchy of genres. And at the very top, if you wanted to be a known artist and really celebrated, you had to paint what is called history paintings. And history paintings could relate to historical facts, to biblical facts, to mythology, anything where you had lots of people and it was telling the story and supposedly enhancing the values of life, if you want. Below that, you have genre painting. And genre painting is actually scenes of domestic life. So scenes of everyday life, which was not seen as valuable as the history painting because they were not as noble, considered as noble. But you would have the Chardin, for example, made these lovely scenes with people in rooms, a mother teaching to a child to read and so on. Portraiture comes just below that. And that doesn't mean that painters were not doing many different genres, but they had to be able to do the top to be really appreciated. So portraiture is, of course, part of any good painter portfolio. Then come two others. You have landscape and still life, which are pretty close together at the bottom of the hierarchy, because painters that were mostly painting that were considered as unable to do history paintings. And so it was really a minor genre. And we'll see that it's very interesting. There is a complete change in the middle of the 19th century towards these two style of paintings because they are eternal. All the big history paintings get completely out of fashion. They are heavy, they're typically large, which a regular house cannot accommodate. So we see that big change there. Also, we have to talk about technical aspect of painting. As you know, the painters were using all kinds of pigments, and I love this picture because it has such beautiful colors. But what they were doing is literally going to the local apothecary at first and get some rocks or some chemical compounds. And these were the pigments they were working with. They also would assemble some soils. They would love Arizona for that because you have the iron oxide, which gives such a beautiful color. But all the ochre colors are coming from the soil. So typically, one of the things that a young assistant would learn going to a workshop was how to put together some pigments and prepare them for the master. So they had, for anything that was hard, they had to really pound on them. And then all these were going in little bladders that were used by painters. By the 18th, 19th century, we start having dealers that deal with the pigments and they could go to. But the big revolution comes with the invention of collapsible paint tubes, which completely changed the life of artists because now they had painting that was ready to be used and they could go out. And this is going to favor the whole idea of painting outdoor, is the fact that they don't have to prepare everything and that the pigments might be dry by the time they're outside or whatever. They now are going to be able, from the mid-century, to be able to use these collapsible paint tubes that were invented in 1841 by John Gough Rand, an American man here. And he is smart, he patents the collapsible metal squeeze tube. So this is about, this is what he first did, and then he very quickly improved it to this, and then the rest were manufacturers, as you still know, this is Winsor and Newton that still exist, and we have different places. So this is a very, very important event. that's going to make the life of the Barbizon group as well as the Impressionist much, much easier. They can take their easel, their canvas, their little tubes, and go out in nature and paint. A lot of painters of these, and I'm sorry, I didn't circle the blue. My fault. Poor Jerry has difficulty. So Camille Corot, Jean-François Millet, Théodore Rousseau, Charles d'Aubigny, Jules Dupré, Narcisse Virgile Diaz de la Peña, Constant Troyon, Rosa Bonheur. Rosa Bonheur is not part of the group, but she's a very important artist, completely contemporary with that group. And this is about the only place where I could put her, and we'll talk about her. And at the bottom, you have the different the leaders of the country. So as you can see, they're all pretty much contemporary. We did talk already about Camille Corot and Jean-François Millet, especially Millet, because he's considered as a realist painter. And Corot, because he is going to be part, the little flyers are at the back. Corot appears in different parts because he's going to be also considered as a realist, and is going to go to Italy and make lots of paintings about that. Now, they are precursors. Landscape was already done prior to the Barbizon, but they were typically landscape that were sketched in the outdoor and then were painted in the studio. And we have the great Dutch painters, such as Jacob van Ruysdael, we'll talk about next semester, by the way, at length when I talk about Dutch painting. And for him, doing these superb landscapes is a celebration of their new country. Don't forget that they seceded from the Spanish Netherlands around the turn of the century. And so by he is back in the 1670, but by that time the country is formed. They have reclaimed a lot of land from the sea and so on. They're very proud of their country. They're the first republic in Northern Europe. And when you see the way he treats the windmill there, it looks like the giant that was so useful to, by the way, to their industry. Other landscapists, and there are more than that, but Meindert Hobbema, who also celebrates the beauty of the landscape, always these huge skies. Don't forget, the country is very flat. I think the highest relief there might be 100 meters, you know, so that's it. You don't have mountains in the Netherlands. We also have, of course, Constable in England, Constable who brings a kind of a more romantic view to his way, though he's also a scientist in the sense that he's going to study the clouds and literally when he goes out and sketches for his paintings, he's giving the name to the clouds to make sure it's at such a time, to make sure that the shape is respected. They're not just accidental clouds. They are what it was there and reflected the weather of the time. Here is, for example, one of his sketches where he shows the cirrus clouds. As you know, these ones that are really taken within the wind in the upper atmosphere and really show this marvelous scheme. Yes.
Did you notice that he documented different?
Yes.
The files and all that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Did you see them yesterday morning? They were fantastic.
They were. But they are spectacular when you have sunset or sunrise. I have all these documented in my telephone, believe me. Then you have somebody who is slightly less known, but because he died very young, as you can see, he died at age 26, was a superb artist, lived in France, but was of English parents and did both, though he mostly practiced in France, has a sense of light that is superb. and had quite, during his short career, had quite an influence on many painters. He is the one that took Delacroix to England and made him know the various artists, including Constable and Turner. These were considered by him as pochades. These are watercolors. And so these were kind of quick paintings he would do outdoor, and he might reproduce them in the studio.
What's a pochade?
Pochade.
Pochade.
So that's it, pochade. Poche is okay, pocket.
Okay.
So pochade is probably comes from the idea he could almost put it in his pocket. These were rather small. Yeah, you see they are 20 centimeter by 26. So about that big. But it's extraordinary. He was such a talented artist, and it's so sad that he died so young. Now, there is an artist who is considered the precursor of the Barbizon school as well, because he went and did paintings in that region. And we talk about Georges Michel, who is very little known by now. But there shows you the mills at Montmartre. So look at how still countries, this is still the countryside. And when you know Montmartre nowadays, I mean, it's busy street and so on. It's always very interesting. But there were many mills on the hill of Montmartre. And then the storm on the other side. Also a very good sense of light and the clouds, but never really made it fame-wise. So where is Barbizon? Okay, we have the city of Paris, and down here you have the forest of Fontainebleau. You know about the Fontainebleau Palace of Francis I. It's very close to it. And here is the forest that was the big forest where the kings used to hunt. And this has become then, it's only 60 kilometers from Paris, and became that kind of a refuge for many outside of the bustling new Paris. And Barbizon is that very small town that is there. And where they started, there was an auberge that we'll see where they will stay typically. And then some of them will buy little houses there and settle there. Here's a photograph of the forest of Fontainebleau, just a part of it. It's a very beautiful place, by the way, really quite remarkable. And you have some ponds and some little creeks within. And here's the Auberge Gannes, which still exists. This is a modern, it's a contemporary picture of it. This is the way it was in the around 1900. And here is now a bronze plaque set in 1884 on a rock that represents Jean-François Millet and Théodore Rousseau, some of the Barbizon painters. And so here's the size of the small village at the time of Barbizon and where the auberge is located. So we're going to see these different figures. Most of them really struggled during their life, and their paintings, the value of their paintings went up 4 times, after they died. But very, very often they struggled a lot. He was born in Paris, but his father was from the Jura region in the eastern part of France, and a higher type of relief. By the age of 13, he was sent by his father to his native province to do some office work at the sawmill. But there, Theodore learned to appreciate nature. The Jura is a beautiful region. And so he really fell in love with nature. And when he came back to Paris, he decided to become a landscape painter. He tried many times to enter the Academy for the Rome Prize for historical landscape, but didn't succeed. And so he went on, he went to the Auvergne, which is part of the central part of France, which is also very beautiful, very hilly. There are lots of extinct volcanoes there. He started really studying landscape there. And this is the first entry that he was able to do for the first salon. He became a friend of Millet and Diaz, who settled in Barbizon in 1844, and so became one of the principal members of the group. But he wasn't successful at exhibiting in the salon. And for a painter, it was a tremendous source of advertising. If you could hang a few paintings at the salon, this is how your name would become known, and you could have some customers. So he was known as le grand refusé, the big refused, because he was never, as I say, accepted there. He became also towards the end interested in Japanese art at the time where it was a really new novelty. So here's in early painting he did during a trip to Normandy, very typical old houses with you have these mixture with apparent wood structure and then the dry earth.
Is it like a stucco?
Yeah. And you still see some of these houses, the old houses. So he had at the time joined a kind of a group of Bohemian that were gathered around Théophile Toré, who was an early socialist and future art critic, became quite instrumental in talking about these young painters. And because of the eccentricity of that group, he even was pushed further away from the jury, who was so conservative, as you can imagine. So as I mentioned here, you have the very typical architecture that you can find in the Netherlands and in Flanders too. As he was not able to get into the salon, he decided to go for paintings that would be of modest scale that he could sell easily. And this is what we'll see most of the time with him. And very beautiful paintings, very nicely decorative, not very large, but well painted. This is the forest of Fontainebleau. And as you can see, this one is in the Getty, but he has many in the Louvre and in other great museums by now. Of course, he didn't profit of this. So he became a very dear friend of Dupré, Jules Dupré, who we'll see in a minute. It's really, there is a nice little episode. He was a contented bachelor until he was brought to the brink of matrimony in 1847 by the novelist Georges Sand, that you all heard of, who wanted to offer him the hand of her adopted daughter, Gossip, who so blamed on Dupré, and finally that didn't work. And by then he settled in Barbizon, accompanied by an ailing woman, Elisa Gros, with whom he shared the rest of his life, though everybody believes that he was gay, and the relationship with Dupré was a little more than just friendly. Again, there we have that expression he was using, dessin peinture, drawing, painting. So it was for him that kind of a feeling to draw things more than paint, and then go from there. He could make some larger painting if he wanted to. His paintings were not, it didn't have the vigor and the energy of Delacroix, for example. It was very tamed, but very beautiful. Here's Les Chênes d'Apremont. So this is outside of the Forêt de Fontainebleau. He was very frustrated during his life because he was also a friend of Narcisse Virgile Diaz, who was made Knight of the Legion of Honor, though he had done nothing for the country, and Rousseau felt that he did. So he was frustrated about that, but then got it the year after. And here's a little more Marsh. This was, by the way, exhibited at the Salon in 1853, so one of his few successes for that. And you can see this is very much a horizontal line, a low horizon, but extremely well composed painting. Marsh in the Landes, so that's in the Bordeaux region. He was also, and many of these painters were also doing a lot of etchings and printed material. So here I mean, when you look at this, this is very contemporary. This is very modern in the handling of the line. It has nothing anymore to do with Dürer or even Rembrandt. It's a much more modern handling. He became really very nervous towards the end of his life because his companion really went down into insanity, probably had Alzheimer or how to call it? Dementia. And sorry, and this was really a weight for him. And so he started really be hostile to critiques and to some people that were not going quite in his way. And this is one of the last painting he did, which is remarkable, by the way. Show the really, it's the nobility of the trees when you see that, because they're big giants and they're really beautiful. The great oaks of all the Babréaux.
Did he use a photo reference at that time?
Not quite. It's 64. We'll see that Corot is definitely doing it. Not that I know with Théodore Rousseau. He might not even have had the money to buy himself a camera. But Corot definitely will talk about it. And here is Jean-Baptiste Corot, who was born in Paris in 96 to a wig maker and a milliner. So that was two very compatible jobs. He turned to oil painting in 1821 and began immediately with landscapes. Studied with landscape painter Michelon, traveled to Italy, and that was a big influence on him. In 1825 to 28, focused on landscape, but then also became a very good figure painting. In 29, he came to Barbizon to paint in the forest of Fontainebleau and met the member of the group, Rousseau, Huet, Troyon, Millet, and Daubigny. Did two more trips to Italy in 34 and 43, and in 60s became interested in photography. He's going to use it, and we'll highlight that in a minute. He died in 1875, much more successful than most of the other painters, by the way. Was an easier nature, you know, he could deal. Some of these people just couldn't find a way to deal with dealers or others. Corot was a smart man and had a lot of very famous students. Among his pupils, we have Camille Pissarro, Eugène Boudin, Berthe Morisot, Stanislas Lépine. But the beauty and the success of his landscape painting brought an incredible production of forgeries between the 1870s and 1839. So if ever you one day have a chance to buy a Corot, be very, very careful. Here's one of his early landscape in 1834. Apparently, Corot was a big child, kind of shy and awkward. He blushed when spoken to. And before the beautiful ladies who frequented his mother's salon, he was embarrassed and fled like a wild thing. Emotionally, he was an affectionate and well-behaved son who adored his mother and trembled when his father spoke. I think that gives you very easily the kind of personality. He did a lot of lithograph when he was young, but became one of the most influential landscape painter. Here you can see this one with the view of the forest of Fontainebleau, but at the front, you have that little image of the girl reading among the white flowers.
Wood nymph.
Pardon?
She's a little wood nymph.
Yeah. But this is where we have what is known as the typical Corot landscape, with that very kind of grayish blue tone for the greens. It's silverish. And it's very typical of his. But there you can also see the use of photography. So he would take a photograph of the tree, but in France, the air is rarely still. So the time that the photograph had to probably pose for 3 or 4 minutes, the tree had moved. And you have that thing that he reproduces in his painting is the movement of the branches in the air, which we call halography. That is the proof of the use of the photograph to paint this. Very typical of Corot, but it gives really that sense of movement, so it's slightly blurred. He has an incredible delicate touch when he does his landscape. If you compare it to Rousseau, which was kind of sturdy and you could say almost heavy at times, this is just the opposite. It's very light touch, transparent almost at times.
You can see why I'm fascinated with photography
Yeah.
and inspiration.
This is another very typical.
I know Bernard was very fascinated by it. How captive light changed light.
So you see again that movement, and so you see the landscape, through the tree, but it's not fixed, it's not focused in a sense, and that's exactly what you would have with that kind of long pose photograph. But they're incredibly attractive. And he did some format that were larger. You have some smaller Corot, which would be, not quite 3 feet in width, but you have some that are over 3 feet in length. And again, these tones, you don't have real green with him. He really goes into the brown silver, a little bluish even. And here is actually a memory of one of his trips in Smyrna, Bournabat, where he shows you some of the fortification along the river and the barge. It's very different. I could go on, show and show, but I've talked already quite a bit about Corot before, so I have to be fair to the others. Mm-hmm. One of the most known figure of the Barbizon is Daubigny. He was not the oldest, but he was a kind of a father figure. He was also more successful than Corot had been, and quite a nice painter. He was known to have a barge. It was called bottin, a little barge, and he would go on the river, on the pond, and paint from there. That was an inspiration for Monet, by the way. It is Daubigny that gave Monet the idea of having his little boat and paint from it. He was born in Paris from a family of painter, was taught by his father at first. Initially painted in a traditional style, but then he changed once he became in touch with the other Barbizon people. He was very close to Camille Corot, and as I mentioned, on his famous boat, Bottin, that he had turned into a studio. He went on the Seine River and Devoise. So here's some of his work, an early work on the sluice gate at Optevos in the Isère. Very realistic, but again, look at the palette of colors in the sky. It's very rich. The barge. I couldn't find a picture of the Bottin. I wish I had. I don't know if it exists, but I couldn't find it. But here's the barges, again on the river. A lot of images of water, he really favored it. The mouth of the Thames. Still the big ship at a distance. He visited England in 1866 and returned because of the Franco-Prussian War, not to be drafted in the army in 70. And while he was in London, he met Claude Monet. And together they went from London to the Netherlands. And this is where Monet is going to be first facing paintings of Dutch painters that he didn't know before. When he came back to Auvers, and Auvers should be a familiar name for you, it's the famous church painted by Van Gogh. He met Paul Cézanne, who was there too. And so definitely influenced Cézanne there. That's a riverbank, again, very rich sky. That's a late period. The riverbank. With Daubigny, you almost always have water. And of course, water is attractive. I know that when I take pictures, as soon as it has rained, I'm looking for that reflection in the water. I like it. And again, they were also doing some etchings and very different style to what we saw with Rousseau. More traditional, that you can see some Rembrandt in there. I mentioned Jules Dupré. He was the very close friend of Théodore Rousseau. He's among the painters, they're more what you would say the exponent of a tragic and dramatic aspect of nature. So he's going to look at broken limbs and things that come out of the ordinary. He was born in Nantes, so on the western part of France, and was able to exhibit in the Salon in 31. He came to England where he was impressed by Constable and really learned to express movement in nature. He spent some time in Southampton and Plymouth. Of course, there he definitely he was facing the wind. This is the barnyard. As you can see, rich coloring, soft touch too when you see the thatched roof. But you have that accidental tree at the front, and that's the kind of thing he's going to show quite often. He's more romantic, let's say, than what we have seen up to now. Here's a very beautiful autumn landscape. He was trained as a decorator on porcelain in his father's factory. He only turned to painting in 1829. So you see more detail with him. Once you work on porcelain, like Boucher, for example, also worked a lot on porcelain. It's small things and, the small brush. always like to show a painting in its frame because you see the difference when you see it without frame or within the frame. It's quite interesting. Beautiful sky, very dramatic image there of the pond with oaks. A quiet afternoon. And then finally, seascape at Cailleuse on the French coast. And there you can see, we are in 1870. In 2 years, you have the first exhibition of the Impressionists. And in that work, you can see that, for example, the works of Boudin or Jonkind, they have that similar feel. Study of light. A very different painter is Narcís Vigil Díaz de la Peña, was born of Spanish parents in Bordeaux, so not too far from Spain. At the age of 10, he became orphan, and he really had a lot of misfortune when he was young. His foot was bitten by a reptile in the woods near Sèvres, and the bite was badly dressed, and it ultimately cost him his leg. They had to cut his leg, and so he was famous for his wooden stump. His early works were kind of romantic composition, a little bit like Delacroix, but then he became the painter of the forest, and he's really known for a particular style with that kind of idea of the vortex, where he looks at, you have that the forest, but you have that appeal towards that clearance in the middle. And that's very typical. When you see that, you can be sure it's a Díaz de la Peña. And this is another one of the forest scene. With just a tiny little fisherman in the middle. They can barely discern it.
How old was he? 10?
10.
And when was he bitten by the reptile?
Just shortly after that. Here is the old windmill near Barbizon. So that's part of the landscapes you can find in the Barbizon area. He was also trained, by the way, for decorating porcelain. And he studied the old master in the Louvre. He only went to the Fontainebleau forest in 1835, where he met the other artist. He was pretty well seen by the critics of the time because of the richness of his palette. They had a very beautiful coloring. They called that pile of jewels. He was admired by the Impressionists, especially Renoir and Sisley. And here's another very pretty painting, Forest of Fontainebleau in the autumn. Let's take a little break, and then we'll go on with Constant Troyon. So we can talk about, have a little comment, or you can have a cup of coffee, stretch your legs. People online on Zoom, if you have any remark, please let me know. Don't forget to unmute yourself. So this is quite a difference with what we saw with the Russian, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a much more intimate type of painting. But
You were saying that they put movement in there by blurring the image. Was that just that one painter, or is that
Coho in particular, because he became very adept of photography, and it is true photography. When he saw the result of his photograph, that he discovered. He said, oh yeah, the wind moved the things. And so he reproduced that in his painting.
Ah.
Makes them very interesting.
And don't forget.
I'm surprised that didn't catch on because that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Well, I remember reading a book about Bonar and experimental
Yeah.
photography. So who's the first, I mean, I don't know if you know, but who's the first who said like, oh my goodness, the camera? And we,
Coho is probably one of the first. You have then the guy is going to work a lot with photography because of his problem with the sun. The guy had the kind of a condition with the eyes. He couldn't stay out in the bright sun.
yeah.
And so taking photographs of what he wanted to paint was one way for him to do it. So he relied a lot on photography.
I wanted to ask you one thing. It was early on, I think it was about this guy Boynton.
Yes, oh, I love Bonington.
You said he was a mentor and took somebody somewhere, I can't remember.
Delacroix
Delacroix
to England.
so
He
how
taught Delacroix English.
he was-
He taught English, yeah. And he went to England and exposed him to the paintings of Constable and Turner.
So was he a student of his?
No, they people that met at the academy or on the surrounding, it became a circle.
Yeah.
Painters would have a glass of wine or a coffee together. That's the way things were.
So he met him out and about or at the academy, one or the other.
Yeah, he didn't go to the academy, but in the surrounding, you had all these side academies. It wasn't just a word on its own.
When you learn about him.
So it's really, I was thinking about it. I said, gosh, when we saw the Russian paintings that were so vibrant and gave such an impact, I said, this is going to be a letdown, but it's a very different thing. It's like a whisper compared to an opera, Yeah, it's very quiet.
Is it Dupre who does the marble trees? Dupre?
Yeah, but they all did at the
Well, some
time.
were especially.
Yeah,
But the detail was so amazing.
absolutely superb. And Dupré, the interesting thing, rarely talked about when you talk about Barbizon, they talk about Daubigny, but Dupré is very little, yeah.
But you can see where this is going.
Yes,
There's a
absolutely.
prejudice, the next step.
It-
There's
it's-
a little bit of a haze coming in.
Exactly, and it's what the impression is, the thing is they're going to really paint outdoor. So they have to go fast because the light changes.
Oh, yeah.
So
Well,
it's.
you know, when you try to take a photo at sunset. right?
Yeah.
And you go inside.
And you
for a
do-
minute, right?
I
And you're like,
know.
oh. Or some car comes by and it's literally a 2-second window.
And then it's darker, yeah. But it's the whole atmosphere, also who you cater to. These paintings are not typically going into palaces. They go into the bourgeois home. So it's a
So
very
are these
different
mostly
customer
commissioned?
base.
People would commission these or these were just done?
No,
People
they
look
would
at them.
sell. They wouldn't commission. They would sell.
They did it for the.
And so that's where it's important that they had ties with some dealers that could, that they could sell to, or the salon. That's why the salon was so important. They could hang that there and their name would become known. So, okay, let's go on because I want to talk now about a very different person who is also part of that group. And I'm talking about Constant Troyon, born in Sèvres near Paris, and was also connected with the father was connected with the famous porcelain factory. So he himself entered, typical, the father has some links there. So the guy, pretty young, is sent to the atelier as a decorator. And until he was 20, he really worked a lot on porcelain, which means labor on tiny little things. But he made him a master of these detailed painting. By the time he reached 21, he was traveling the country as an artist and painted landscapes so long as his finances lasted. And then he would go painting porcelain. And then with the money he had gathered, he would go on and paint landscapes. They were not paying as well. He also went to the Netherlands and saw painting by Dutch painters, and particularly painters such as the Paulus Potter that painted the famous young bull that has quite a story, and Albert Cuyp. We have to remember, if you remember, that the revolutionary troops in the early 1790s went to Belgium and the Netherlands and looted a lot of paintings and brought them back to Paris. The young bull was one of the paintings that was taken from the collection of the Stadtholder, it was the king already at that time in the Netherlands, and brought it to Paris. And when Napoleon stepped down in 1815, the French didn't want to send that painting back. They had fallen in love with that painting completely. And they were very reluctant. So, but by the time he went to the Netherlands, he saw the painting, which, by the way, now hangs in the Mauritshuis, if you go to The Hague. It's a very large painting. As you can see, it's 2.36 by 3.39 So a large painting. He's almost life-size and quite impressive. Now, when Paulus Potter painted that bull, he didn't painted a bull. He just did the same as Pythagoras, was the great Praxiteles and other great sculptors in Greece. He took 6 bulls and took the best of the 6 of them to make that extraordinary exemplars. And people that know the animals really well can tell you the different ages of the animal that he took the things. It's really interesting.
The face is very young.
Yes, and so you have that apparently by the size of the fur on the neck, that's one idea, the stand of the legs and so on, show you that it's not all the same animal, but he's spectacular. And he represented at the time for Paulus Potter the quality of animal that the people were able to produce in the Netherlands, in that young country. That's part of the whole pride of the country. So he is exposed to that and to the works by Albert Cuyp with the hilly landscape with cows and herder. And he falls in love with this type of paintings. He says, I'm not just going to do landscape, I'm going to do animals within landscape. And here is, for example, his cattle drinking, which was something that wasn't really done at that time in France, because it was showing what people would call maybe vulgar side of life, until they realized how beautiful it was. And it's really interesting. You could see them from far, but to see them from close was something very different. So you have that integration, perfect integration of the animals within the landscape too, which is very beautiful. Very beautiful, broad brush work, pure color, and definitely a sympathy for the animals.
Well, how do you say that a guy from the Netherlands, the CUYP?
Paulus Potter,
No, the one after that. Can we-
Albert Kuip.
Yeah, can we look at that one just for a moment again? I was just thinking how he would have fallen in love with that because it's just so romantic.
Yeah, it is. Once but set yourself at that time for the bourgeois.
Yeah,
They were not going to the countryside that way.
no.
Sorry, people, I don't know what's happening here. I'm
That's,
losing my
no.
screen. Okay.
Huh.
Something happened there.
But I
So,
mean, the arcade, the idea of Arcadia.
yeah,
I mean,
Arcadia did before.
yes.
So it's
Arcadia,
17th
like
century.
reading in a
Yeah.
book.
Oh, yes. But that's, it's also, I think, in the time, don't forget for French people, the 19th century is an incredibly turmoil type of period. They have revolution after revolution, war after war. This was peaceful. This was positive. And definitely there is that yielding. The angler. So we have that little creek and then the animal. Very Constable-like, by the way, that kind of painting. With, again, very rich palette. And setting off to a market. Beautiful, and almost Coho-like in the background, which is interesting. So you can see that they knew one another and they would kind of get that inspiration from time to time and try to use it. Now, there are more than the people that I showed you. I showed you the most important one. And now I'm going to talk about the lady who, I'm always thinking, these people were struggling. Most of them didn't make a lot of money. Coho is probably one of the exceptions. But think of being a woman painter. Talk about the difficulties that they were facing. Very interesting character. She's one of the greatest female painter of the 19th century. And I'm talking about Rosa Bonheur. Rosa Bonheur was largely self-taught. Though she was born in Bordeaux from a landscape and portrait painter, and her mother was a pianist. She was the eldest of a family of artists, animal painters, Auguste Bonheur and Juliette Bonheur, and the animal sculptor Isidore Jules Bonheur. So there we have four in the same family that all were really good painters. She moved to Paris in 1828 at the age of 6 with her mother and siblings. And it's her mother who taught her to read and write by asking her to choose and draw a different animal for each letter of the alphabet.
Wow.
So that's really interesting because it already kind of brings the interest. So she credits her love of the drawing animals to these reading lessons with her mother. She was then trained by copying images from drawing books. And as long as her training progressed, she started making studies of domesticated animals, including horses, sheep, cows, goats, rabbits, and other animals. At 14, she began to copy paintings at the Louvre, which was the thing, if you could do it. Her favorite painters were Poussin, Peter Paul Rubens, but she also copied the paintings. Sorry, that's my mom. Hopefully she got the I told her not to call. Anyway, she also copied the paintings of Paulus Potter, Franz Porbus the Younger, and others. Very interesting character because, so sorry, but I have to take it otherwise. Maman, je donne cours.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay, it's fine.
So she liked Poussin, Rubens, and who else?
Poussin, Rubens, also copied the paintings of Paulus Potter, Franz Porbus the Younger. So it's a very eclectic type of group. Carole Dujardin, Salvatore Rosa. And here you have two photographs of Rosa Bonheur by Disdery, by the way, is the guy that invented the carte de visite, the business card at the time, you know, where everybody had to have its photograph and you were distributing that around among your friends. So you see her above there with short hair, which is very unusual for the time. And then in men's attire in the bottom picture, which was forbidden in France at the time for a woman. So she was openly gay, very openly gay, lived with her friend until her friend died, and then started a relationship with an American painter, Klumke. She was quite influenced by a movement that's called the Saint-Simonianism. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this because it's very interesting, kind of avant-garde, but pretty strange movement at times. It was a political, religious, and social movement of the first half of the 19th century that was inspired by Claude-Henri de Rouvroy, Comte de Saint-Simon. That's why it's called Saint-Simonialism. And focused on the perception that growth of industrialization and scientific discovery would have profound changes on society. It believed that society would restructure itself by abandoning traditional ideas of temporal and spiritual power that would lead to a productive society based on benefiting from a union of men engaged in useful work, the basis of true equality. No surprise that Karl Marx looked at that and said they were the forefathers of Marxism in the sense. After his death, after the death of Saint-Simon, the group became increasingly ritualistic and religiously minded. It decried, I love it, it decried marriage as tyranny, promoted free love. I mean, think, that's the 19th century. That's incredible, incredible. Declared himself chosen by God, began predicting that a female Messiah would soon save humanity. Holy. So the group kind of split in two groups. One became very extreme, the other one became more reasonable. And some of the followers visited Constantinople and then Egypt and literally influenced the creation of the Suez Canal in search of a messianic revelation. But then the former movement expired. But they were, the other part, more conservative, was very instrumental in creating, so the Suez Canal Company and the Banque Crédit Mobilier, which was so very interesting how it leads to that. She followed the idea of liberty of, you know, that the marriage wasn't what she looked for, the idea of strong women and the industrialization. It had a lot of adepts that were also artists. And so I thought I had to share that with you.
You have to share that. I need to know more about
So early on, she did produce some sculpture. Here is the grazing ewe. But very quickly, she ceased sculpture in the mid-1850s because she didn't want to compete against her brother, who was mostly, he was not a painter, but was a sculptor. And so she studied actually literally the anatomy of animals, went to veterinary school to study some of the osteology in the slaughterhouses in Paris and dissecting animals at the veterinary school. So she made detailed studies of different animals to be able to integrate that. And this is the Labourage Nivernais. As you can see, very amazing image of these strong oxen that are there pulling.
Wow.
And you don't expect that from a woman, you know, until then you have women, they always do a mother and child and this kind of thing. But this is very different. One of her most famous painting is this one of the horse fair, where she painted at the Salon in 1853 and was immediately purchased by Cornelis Vanderbilt for $53,600, which was a record price at the time.
Oh, from the Vanderbilts, did you
Yeah.
say? I misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why it's at the Metropolitan.
Yeah, of course.
But it's a very large painting. It's 2.5 meters by 5.
Wonderful.
So there is actually another painting that she did of the same subject, but this slightly smaller version that is in another museum. I think it's at the National Gallery or so. So you look at that very dramatic lighting, the incredible movement, and that grandeur of the horse's fair. It's absolutely stunning. I think that's a fabulous painting. Here are some of her drawings, studies for it. She was recognized quite easily, as you can imagine, when you see the quality of her paintings. And so it's always interesting to see the Exposition, the World Fair of 1855, where the painting was exposed. Look at the way they were stacking paintings above one another. And you see down here, the haymaking in the Auvergne. And you can see the size of the painting compared to others. She went to England, and here's wonderful, the Highland Shepherd. Quite nice, showing his legs. And a beautiful front behind him in that very arid landscape. She met Queen Victoria, who admired very much her works. And you can imagine, coming from Victoria, she would enjoy to see a woman there. And did many paintings in the Highlands in Scotland. But she also did animals just like this. This is a beautiful Sultan and Rosette, the dogs of the family Czartoryski. And see the tiny little dog. And then the other one, very noble and calm. And then this one, we have very little understanding of it, absolutely beautiful. And it's named, as you can see, Brizot with the reverse Z on top. It's probably the name of the dog, but we know nothing about the animal except that he's an otterhound. The Brizot comes from the name of an ancient Greek goddess that was regarded as the protector of sailors and fishermen. So it is in the Wallace collection in London. It's just beautiful. You want to pet him. You see every.
It sort of looks a little impression.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, the background too.
Yes.
It's more detailed than what an impressionist would do.
Of course, but the way it's.
Yeah.
flowing. Oh,
But it's just so lively. It's incredible. Very impressing, the wounded eagle. At LACMA, so you can see if you go to LA. The wild boars in the snow. Again, you can feel the cold almost, don't you? The palette is very interesting. The lion at rest. Intensity of the eyes looking at you. Did a lot of horses, as you can imagine. This is wild horse. She painted.
Well, being an artist in other countries, getting the recognition she's getting.
But even her, you know, not everybody knows Rosa Bonheur. She is one of the first one that goes out of the typical themes, because contemporary with her, or earlier than her, would be Vigée Lebrun, for example, who was very, very celebrated. But this is a completely different subject for a woman.
Yeah.
It's the first time that a woman goes into that kind of a thing. And so she rationalized the idea that she was wearing men's clothing because she was painting animals. And then she even made a picture of Colonel William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill, in 1889.
Keeps going on and off, but I mean, I get it eventually.
I can't get people to stay. So that I thought was really interesting. I would have liked to see that encounter, these two together.
But do you think that she saw him?
Oh,
Do you
yes.
think it- or-
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, because Buffalo Bill went around, he traveled to Paris in 89. And so this is where they would have met. So very different on January 14, we will see the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and Ruskin, which is going to be quite interesting for the dynamic between all these painters, which is very interesting, but also their style is quite remarkable and very known. When you know Ophelia is my daughter's favorite painting. I always know. Okay, let me.
You know why? Because I used to really, really love it.